I'd like to welcome all of you back to our 4RG Meets. It's been a while. This is our third season of these monthly online presentations, and almost all of them are available on the For Our Grandchildren website, as this one will be recorded as well and posted. So I am one of your co-hosts, Beth McKinley, and this is Scott McKinley. And we were talking today about how it's so good to see all of you coming out, because, you know, it's good to know there's a lot of other people out there wanting to learn about this and who are caring about this and want to be involved in this. So thank you so much. Tonight, we're pleased to welcome Katie Krelove and Peter Quinby as presenters. I'll turn things over to them in a couple of minutes. We have a few announcements, and they'll be telling us about the work that they do to preserve the integrity of the Catchacoma Old Growth Forest and the role that this magnificent hemlock ecosystem plays in maintaining biodiversity and also mitigating climate change. We've allotted an hour for this meeting, but we usually go over. Questions and conversations often continue after 8 p.m. and we invite you to stay longer if you wish. Scott has muted everyone. I really wished I had a mute button when I was teaching. That would have made my life easier. So we've muted everyone. But you can unmute yourself to take part in the conversation or ask a question. And if you're having any technical issues, just reach out in the chat. I'd like to acknowledge that For Our Grandchildren is situated on the traditional lands of the Mississauga and the Chippewa Nations, an area covered by the Williams Treaty. As many of you know, all Indigenous cultures around the world have had a really profound cultural and spiritual connection to the land and all the beings. And so it's maybe shouldn't be surprising to know that 80% of global biodiversity is found on Indigenous lands globally. So I want to offer my gratitude and say miigwech to the Indigenous nations and peoples all around the globe.
Thank you. So for those that are new to For Our Grandchildren, we are a climate action group based in Peterborough, Nova, and our mission is to engage and mobilize people to take effective action in response to the climate crisis. And 4RG has several very active communities, one of them which is having a meeting on the 26th, that I won't be attending. But anyways, no, there's lots of committees, and if you would like to learn more about 4RG or about its committees or get more involved, you can check on on our website. We have a newsletter, there's a Facebook page, a Facebook group, Instagram account, and even an X account, which used to be called Twitter. So there's a couple of announcements that we need to make, and so the first one is Fridays for Future, and Mel, one of the members of 4RG, has agreed to do a little introduction of that event because she's highly involved in that. So, Mel.
Thank you, Scott. Hi, everybody. So yeah, this Friday is a global day of action it's Fridays for Future, but also being organized by End Fossil Fuels. And so this is a youth-sponsored, youth-led movement, and it's a global strike day. So in about at least 47 Canadian cities, there's going to be rallies between Friday through Saturday, I believe. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, maybe. So in Peterborough, we are going to be gathering at Confederation Square from 12 to 2 on Friday the 15th, and that's going to be our global climate strike day. So the purpose of this, the timing of this is surrounding the United Nations General Assembly that's happening on the 17th in New York City. So world leaders are gathering there. And so this strike is timed sort of to pressure all the richest governments of the world, which, as I'm sure you all know, includes Canada, to end the use, production, and funding of fossil fuels, and to do this quickly, justly, and permanently. Is the slogan is fight fast, fair, and forever is the theme of this. So it's sort of fighting against the business as usual attitude of many of these governments and ramping up the response to climate change, as the effects of climate change also seem to be ramping up and sort of spiraling away from our control, which is very, very scary. So yeah, if you would all not mind either sharing this information with your networks or attending or getting friends to attend with you, that would be great. And yeah, hope to see you guys there with energy and signs and a little bit of anger maybe for the government. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Mel. Mel is a great organizer of some of these events. She is our cheerleader for sure, and a great organizer. And if you want more information on that, again, the various social media that I mentioned, you can go there and find out what's going on. It is a busy day, September the 30th, because earlier that day at 9 o'clock, Beth and I will be leading a guided walk through the South Drumlin Trail at Thompson Bay, and we'll be exploring the changing season, the fall migration, learn about some of the impacts of climate change on nature. And Beth will also be giving an opportunity to experience a couple of mindful nature connection practices, which can be very helpful as we look for ways to cope with the distress associated with climate change. So it is an Eventbrite type thing, and you can register again, check it out on the either the Facebook page or the website, and find out how to register for that. Also on the 30th
at 3 p.m.
Well, throughout the day, and then culminating at 3. Yeah. Glenn Curtis, who is a member of 4RG as well, and Nick Ormond will be riding their bikes for 280 kilometers as a reminder that the pre-industrial level of CO2 in the atmosphere was 280 parts per million. And for comparison, we are currently sitting somewhere around 422 parts per million, and hence the need for groups like us and other organizations around the world trying to bring this down. Anyways, they will end their ride at approximately 3 at Kawartha, and you can meet them there and possibly go home with one of the free trees that they will be giving away. And you have a pretty good chance of getting one because they have 280 of them to give away. And this is an awareness and fundraising event. And the proceeds are very generously going to the work that we're doing at 4RG. So if you want to make a contribution, again, go to the website and you can contribute there to that event. Next month for 4RG, Robert Lockhart is going to be back for an update on electric vehicles, because a lot has happened in the past 2 years in that industry. So be sure to take advantage of his encyclopedic knowledge as he covers the EV basics, charging EVs, advances in batteries, and the responses of the auto industry and consumers to EVs. Back to you, Beth.
All right, well, thank you. And so if some of you may have attended Robert Lockhart's presentation a couple of years ago, I've reached out to him a couple of times when I've had people questioning some of the aspects of EV and the mining and the batteries and et cetera, et cetera. And he's very current on all of that. So that'll be really good. But tonight we have something really good as well. So we have Katie Krelove and Peter Quinby. Katie is the Ontario campaigner for the Wilderness Committee, which is a national charity that works to protect nature, to defend wildlife, and to fight climate change. The recent publication for the Wilderness Committee supporters is all about pathways to protection in Ontario. So she's going to tell us about the advocacy work aimed at protecting the Catchacoma Old Growth Forest in the context of provincial, federal, and international policy. And Peter Quinby, he worked with a small board of directors to establish AFER, which stands for the Ancient Forest Exploration and Research. They established this in 1992, and he has been the chair and chief scientist since 2004. AFER works to identify, study, and work with conservation groups to protect ancient forests, including the old growth landscapes. So Peter's going to tell us about the scientific aspects of the Catchacoma forest ecology and conservation, and will include the value of the forest for biodiversity conservation and climate stability and cooling.
I want to talk briefly about biodiversity and carbon storage research that we've been doing at the Catchacoma Forest, the north end of Catchacoma Lake in Trent Lakes. This work couldn't have happened without the Wilderness Committee, the group that Katie manages in Ontario, and without the Catchacoma Forest Stewardship Committee, which includes AFER and the Wilderness Committee, as well as a number of local interested people that have all kind of varied background. There are cottagers, there's landowners, there's ecologists, foresters, teachers, etc. People that care about the forest that are willing to help do something about it. So I very much appreciate their help. It's been critical in making the progress we've made. There are a lot of acknowledgements to make. I also want to say that the photos you see in this presentation are from the Catchacoma Forest. There's in the lower left-hand corner there, you can see a outline of the stand in red. It's a very complicated boundary, mainly because it comes from a forest resource inventory map that's just mapping forest, and all the areas that aren't inside those boundaries, most of them are either small lakes or ponds or wetlands. But anyway, AFER respectfully and gratefully acknowledges that the field research activities that we've been engaging in for the last 5 years or so for our project have taken place on the traditional territory, the Mississauga and Anishinaabe. Appreciate that very much. The financial support we've received has come from the Trillium Foundation, the Peterborough Foundation, Eco Canada, the federal government, Ron Waters, Bob Henderson, and the Dura Wood Corporation. But we've also received a lot of other important in-kind support and other types of support, particularly by Katie, Marie Windover, Ted Spence, Peter Courier, Linda Bryden, Nicole Woolley, Andrew Afsek, Cameron Douglas, and Francis Quinby, my son. But what is the issue? What is it that brings us here together? Why are we concerned? What's the problem? Well, lots of problems, right? But what we're talking about here is the fact that, as was earlier discussed tonight, the parts per million is up above 400 now in terms of CO2 in the atmosphere. And but at the same time, this has gone up about 33% since 1850, as you can see in this figure. So has the loss of both primary forest and non-forested terrestrial ecosystems. And so you can see that primary forest has declined since 1850 by almost half, at about 42%. The non-forested primary ecosystems have declined by just a hair below 50% since 1850. So, at the same time we have CO2 going up, we have the loss of species and ecosystems all over the world, and it unfortunately these trends, as was also pointed out, it's kind of discouraging because it seems like things are accelerating, not slowing down. But we have a biodiversity science program that we've been developing and building, and we have three main goals. The first is that we want to become the authority on the ecology and the management of the Catchacoma Old Growth Forest. It is the largest eastern hemlock old growth forest remaining in Canada, and it is unprotected. And it is an example, a very significant example of a primary forest. And primary forests are being focused on more and more all over the world. One of the reasons being because they do store and sequester so much carbon. So another main goal is to recruit scientists, citizen scientists, to help us collect data. And then what good is it unless we apply it? So we want to apply that knowledge, education, and use communication to advocate to improve local land management practices and policies. Okay, so what have we done to date? Well, we just finished up we're actually still in a little bit, our 5th field season. And we've produced quite a few reports, and there's been quite a few articles in the press. You can find almost all that material. There's still stuff that's in draft form, but at peterborougholdgrowth.ca, the website, you can find those materials. But one of the first things that I did once I had an idea that this was an important forest was to look at the data that's available on other old growth forests in eastern hemlock old growth forests in Canada. And basically, we found that this forest is the largest at 16 150 acres, about 662 hectares. But it also happens to be the largest in Canada. That is a very special feature. Anytime you find the largest of a particular type and it remains unprotected, you know, it's kind of a no-brainer. It's like low-hanging fruit. If your business, your objective is to protect ecosystems, biodiversity, you know, carbon storage, that sort of thing, this is like at the top of the list. It's just, like I said, it's a complete no-brainer. It's the largest eastern hemlock old growth forest remaining in Canada. To pursue our goals, we created some partnerships. Partnerships are key, especially with small groups. Cam Douglas's Youth Leadership and Sustainability Program. We connected with them way back in 2019, and they've been helping us every year since to collect data in the field. Troy McMullen at the Canadian Museum of Nature, he does the lichen identification for us. Dennis Murray at Trent University has offered the DNA facility. Oh, he said he would pay for any DNA work we wanted to get done on canines in Catchacoma Forest. And so I have a slide a little later. It's hard to tell whether it's a wolf or a coyote, but that's one of the things we want to try to figure out is, are we dealing with wolves up there? Are we dealing with coyotes? We know that they do intermix, interbreed, and that there's a good chance both populations are there, but we need to start doing some more detailed work on that. Some people might not know what we mean when we say old growth forest. There's 4 main criteria or features. The first is old trees. Every tree species has a point at which it starts to decline in growth. We call that the age of onset or the old age point. For hemlock, it's about 140 years of age. That information comes from the government, not from us. But also, in addition to old trees, you have the trees that have died. We call those snags. They're very valuable as wildlife habitat. There's also logs that fall to the forest floor. And again, they also provide habitat, but they also add organic matter to the soil, which is very important in retaining moisture and providing nutrients and that sort of thing. And retaining and holding on to nutrients in the soil. And finally, the criterion of integrity is important. It'd be hard to call anything an old growth forest south of the Canadian Shield if we didn't accept that there are occasional cut trees in old growth forests. But generally speaking, as we move farther north, there are fewer and fewer cut stumps in the areas we designate as old growth. So we know that, you know, as you go from north to south, the impact of humans just increases exponentially. So those are the 4 main components of old growth forest. And so far, like if you're going to monitor for conservation purposes, you're going to monitor different groups of animals. Well, animals and plants, because basically we throw plants into the species at risk category as well, and invasive species. So plants and animals make up the first 2 categories, the species at risk, 14 of which we have identified at the Catchacoma Forest. And I don't know how many of you know that black ash is now considered a threatened species because of the emerald ash borer, but you know, when you have it used to be a common tree species, being, you know, threatened like that. Now it's really bringing home how scary this whole problem is. But we also have a monitoring program for invasive species, and we started this year to start monitoring for migratory birds. So we have monitoring programs for species at risk, invasive species, migratory birds. We haven't gotten to the point where we're addressing a colonial or pack species or top carnivores or keystone species, but I would like at some point soon to start addressing in more detail, you know, with some field work, start looking at the wolf or coyote population. I think it says 656 species, but my Zoom menu is covering that up. And if I remember right, that's what I typed. But anyway, so basically that boils down to 194 animal species, 349 plant species, 106 fungi, and 7 slime mold species. Of the animals, we've cataloged the presence of 15 mammal species, 67 birds, 9 amphibians, 7 reptiles, 5 fish, 74 insects, 9 arachnids, a millipede, a crustacean, 5 mollusks, and 1 leech species. And for the plants, we've identified and cataloged the presence of 26 tree species, 31 shrubs and vines, 215 flowering herbs, 49 grass rushes and sedges, 7 club mosses, and 21 moss and liverwort species. So one of the reasons we want to do this is because you can't really understand how an ecosystem works until you know what species are there. Every species has, its own life history, and if you don't understand, how the life history of the species affects the establishment and the growth and the reproduction of that species, you're never going to have, a viable management plan. Now you can't do that for everything, but you certainly can pick certain key species to focus on, and then little by little start adding more species as you move through developing a better approach to monitoring and studying the forest. So one of the other, as I said, other focuses of our work is, how much carbon does the Catchacoma forest store? And so when we went about doing this, we found that there's really nothing known. Like that, the Bancroft Minden Forest Company and the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, neither one of those organizations has any idea of what's going on in terms of carbon storage and carbon sequestration. So we set out using some data that was collected by YLS, or the sustainability program. We took those data and have used those to make some calculations. Now we can't say it's a full-blown study, but we can say it's a pretty solid pilot study. And I'm in the process of applying for an Earthwatch grant now to kind of add more data to. We've done some pretty good transect studies in the central part of the forest, but we want to build a better data set, and an Earthwatch grant would help us to do that. So basically, the students sampled trees, snags, logs, and stumps in the central and the western part of the forest, and we estimate that about 202 tons of carbon per hectare were in the plots before logging. There were 6 or 4 plots that had been logged, 4 or 6, I can't actually remember. Look at that. But I think it was 6 plots that were logged. And when we took the mean of the carbon per hectare prior to logging, we were able to use the stumps to determine how much carbon was there prior to logging. We found that there was a 59% decrease from what was there prior to logging to what was there after. Then what we also did was we compared the carbon in the intact areas, areas that hadn't been logged, to the areas that had been logged. We found that the intact areas hold 111% more above ground carbon, and we're only looking at above ground carbon. We haven't looked at roots and other carbon, soil carbon yet. But the intact areas are more than double the amount of carbon compared to the logged. And so if you look at the loss of tree biomass from logging in an area of about 25 hectares, it's the equivalent of 1.24 million gallons of gasoline consumed. This gives you an idea of how much carbon was lost and eventually will make its way into gaseous form back into the atmosphere over a period of 20 to 30 years or so. Now, if the contingency logging takes place, which the Bancroft Minden Forest Company is interested in doing, then we estimate that about 291, almost 292 tons of CO2 will be released, which is the equivalent of about 33 million gallons of gasoline consumed. What we also did is we wanted to get a sense of how the Catchacoma Forest compares to other mature and old growth forests throughout northeastern North America. So we compared the amount of carbon in the central part and the western part, the 55 temperate old growth and mature forest stands throughout northeastern North America, and found that the western portion is in the top 15% of the amount of carbon, and that the central portion is in the top 36% of, and we're talking only the live carbon, not the dead wood. So of these 55 stands throughout northeastern North America, Catchacoma rates very highly in terms of the amount of carbon that it stores and sequesters. And it also, it just points out how important it is to keep forests like this around, because if they are logged, then eventually what the carbon that's in the form of trees ends up becoming converting into atmospheric carbon and just raising temperatures. In addition to doing that biodiversity and carbon work, we're also contributing to a provincial level field protocol that will can be rapidly applied to assess old growth areas that may possibly be old growth. It'll be a protocol that we'll use, and hopefully it'll be adopted. We'll see what happens. But it can, in my opinion, it'll be a very efficient, effective method to determine where old growth is on the lands. We'll continue to produce technical publications. We're going to start to publish some papers in journals. Many papers have been written in the popular media, which has given us good coverage. I'm in the process of putting together a detailed case study, which I hope to publish as a book at some point soon. And we've established and we're expanding a field station very close to the Catchacoma Forest, thanks to Marie Windover and her husband, Al. And the Catchacoma Forest is now sort of officially considered part of the Highlands Corridor, which connects the area around, connects the area just north of Kawartha Highlands Provincial Park with the Queen Elizabeth II Wildlands Park. We hope to at some point start doing some research to address connectivity questions. You know, like if you have to choose where to put your corridor, how do you make that kind of a decision? You know, we can use data to do that. And then also, this is looking at the central portion of the Catchacoma Forest. And what we've got here is a map showing the different slope aspects of this. I think it's about 190 hectares in size. And basically we can use slope aspect as an indicator of temperature. So on the map, wherever you see the redder areas, those are the warmer slope aspects. In other words, when I say a slope aspect, it'd be what direction does the slope of the hill face? So a red or an orange would be facing either south or west, because those are warmer aspects. There's just more sunshine, solar radiation that hits those locations, and they warm up and stay warm longer and more so than the bluer areas that are facing east and north, generally speaking. And we have so we've been able to so far sample, well, 2 years ago, this area was sampled for mother trees or trees that meet the minimum diameter for the old growth condition along transects. And that's how we got these, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but that's how we got the maps on the right-hand side. And the top map on the right shows basically the concentration of hemlock mother trees. So where the circles are bigger and there's more dark orange, that means there's more large hemlock trees, large old hemlock trees. And the map below on the right is the same kind of map for white pine. And then the map at the bottom, the green and yellow map, shows the species diversity of mother trees. So the area where the black circle is corresponds to the area on the map showing the hot areas and the cool areas, the heat map, so to speak. The circles roughly correspond, not exactly, but the circle on the heat map basically has identified what is most likely, I haven't done this quantitatively, but it's most likely the highest, has the highest diversity of aspects and has the highest diversity of temperature. Like if you were to hike around in there, you would find so many different slopes and aspects that you would feel and sense a lot more temperature changes than other areas throughout that portion of the forest. And that also happens to be the same area where the species diversity for mother trees is highest. And so it's just basically, it's just sort of demonstrating a basic ecological principle that like the species that occur there and the amount of species that are there depends on the habitat. And in this case, we're looking at habitat diversity on the left, where we have the heat map, and then we're actually seeing that habitat diversity with real data at the bottom on that mother tree map, the green and yellow mother tree map, showing that the location of the highest diversity also corresponds to the area where the environment, the temperature is most diverse. This past summer, we collected more data on snags, logs, and spring wildflowers, as well as cut stumps for this area shown in color here, the central portion. So we'll have a fair bit of data to go through and start looking at some of these relationships in more detail and do some quantitative analysis. So far, this has just been sort of a qualitative evaluation. So that's kind of work that we will be jumping into, and basically the protocol development is going to use this kind of mapping that you see on these two maps at the top, the hemlock mother trees and the white pine mother trees, basically by doing a systematic coverage of the area with plots every 50 meters or separated by every 50 meters and running transects parallel to each other for the whole 190 hectares. We're able to do nearest neighbor analyses and use predictive kinds of algorithms to make these maps showing, areas of high concentration and areas of medium concentration and areas of high. So we're basically marrying field data with GIS analysis and geographic analysis. Before I do say thank you, I just want to point out this just a bunch of words here, really, but basically, at this point, there's pretty much a complete lack of research funding from the federal and provincial government that focuses on the ecology and conservation of old growth forests. And to me, it's just ridiculous because, we're talking about situations where, like the storms are so strong that they just wipe out, communities with, in seconds, and the heat waves causing unprecedented human mortality, and wildfire fires are raging, everywhere, like here, there, and everywhere, and it's affecting, the quality of the air we breathe, but yet, we just don't seem to be able to figure out how to stop it. And if governments aren't going to fund this kind of work, then, it's really up to citizen scientists to take action, in my opinion. So maybe I'll end it there.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yes.
That's going to say a few words.
Yeah, Peter, it's such a treasure that we have in that forest, and I'm really grateful that you are able to tell us about it and help us to understand the importance of that species to the 656. That was the number on your screen. We could see it. The 656.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the 650 species that have been inventoried, and the comparisons that you used about the amount of gasoline, that would be emitted or not, depending on what happens to the forest, is such a vivid way of taking those numbers and making it real. It's also really interesting to see how your work is helping to protect other old growth forests and really highlights the importance of what needs to be done. So the question we always get here at For Our Grandchildren is, what can I do? And based on your presentation, what we can do is we need to ask for more research funding, number one, and get involved through citizen science. So that is going to be my question. If that's not what Katie addresses, it's just, you know, where do we plug into that, those people that can participate and support citizen science. So thank you so much for that. Really interesting.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I think Katie, you're ready to go then with your portion of it.
Excellent. Okay, thanks for having me for our G. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm very appreciative of the work that you do to raise awareness about the climate emergency that we're in and all the different aspects of it, and you know what people can do in terms of solutions. I want to express gratitude to Peter Quinby. It's been amazing for me to work with him over the past few years and learn from his experience, his decades and decades of experience in surveying old growth in Ontario and fighting for protection of old growth in Ontario. And I just want to reiterate kind of what he ended on to start, is that really he's the leader in this field in the province and in the country. It's shocking to me how few people there are who are like in government or in science researching where old growth is in the country, and how few people are recognizing the importance of protecting it. And you know, so from my end, I've enjoyed being out there on the ground. I've had the privilege to lead a lot of our public hikes in the old growth hemlock forest over the past 3 years. And you know, that's my passion, that's my background. I actually have an environmental education background, so I love that side of it, of getting people on the ground. But I also, you know, have an advocacy background. And so I also really recognize the importance of educating people on policy and law and all that more boring stuff. But once you get into it, it's actually not that boring. And it really, I think, is, you know, another building block that helps us know how to take action. So my presentation is going to focus on quickly outlining some of the policies that are out there that support protection for old growth forests. And I'm going to start from the top, I guess, international. So nature-based climate solutions are kind of the general term that is used in the UN and in the Paris Climate Agreement to talk about all the variety of actions that can be taken to protect, sustainably manage, or restore natural ecosystems that address climate change for the reasons that Peter talked about: carbon storage, actually not releasing carbon into the air. But these sort of solutions also generally provide other benefits as well, such as human health, food and water security, disaster risk reduction. So they not only mitigate climate change, but they also help in adaptation to climate change, while simultaneously providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits. And that's kind of the general definition of nature-based climate solutions. Obviously, there's a lot more that could be gone into that. I could do a whole presentation. But there are general estimates, studies done that show that nature-based solutions could provide 30%, or have the possibility of providing 37% of mitigation needed to meet the Paris Agreement 2030 targets, 37% of the targets, and that's worldwide. And 2/3 of governments supporting the Paris Agreement included nature-based climate solution actions in their national climate plans, including Canada. So one of the 5 pillars of Canada's Strengthened Climate Plan, which is their climate plan that they produced after the Paris Agreement, includes, and you can see this tree on the slide here is directly from that. And it's sort of their version of what they see as nature-based climate solutions. And they've committed to invest, so far committed to investing 4.7 billion over the next 10 years to implement these nature-based climate solutions. That's not enough. I'm just going to say that right out. It's not enough. It should probably be double that. And there's a little bit too much focus on their 2 billion planting trees program and not enough focus on protecting nature, but that's more my opinion. So some caveats about nature-based climate solutions. They do not displace the need to phase out fossil fuels. So it's not, we're doing these nature-based solutions instead of phasing out fossil fuels. We need to do both and the other caveat is that they must be effective. So there's lots of reasons, and again, this could be a whole presentation. There's lots of ways that nature-based climate solutions can be not effective. So they must be effective. The International Union for Conservation of Nature, which is sort of the biggest international body that works on nature-based climate solutions and kind of sets the definitions for them, has produced standards for nature-based solutions, which you can find on the link that I show there. Okay, so if we look at Canada, what counts as effective nature-based climate solutions? So here I'm going to refer to a study that was produced in 2020 by a Canadian biologist that's for the International Union of Conservation of Nature, Risa Smith, called Enhancing Canada's Climate Change Ambitions with Natural Climate Solutions. So she was looking at just this, studying across the country what are the most effective ways of achieving nature-based climate solutions. So you can see this graph over, this is sort of in the next 10 years she's looking at. Targeted protection is number 1. Okay, protecting nature, which means not allowing industrial activity such as logging and mining is generally what we mean by protection, is the number 1 immediate annual emissions reductions, especially when we're talking about areas that are at risk of being logged or mined, right? Planting 2 billion trees is good, but not as effective. And I'm not going to go into the other ones just because we don't have time. Okay, so what do we need to protect? Again, from the same study, the number 1 recommendation, protecting the remaining old growth forests on high productivity sites, especially in, and this is again from the study, British Columbia, old growth boreal forests, and remnant old growth forests in Ontario and Quebec. So this is exactly what Catchacoma is, a remnant old growth forest in Ontario. And the 4th one is native prairie grasslands, would result in immediate emissions reductions of about 5 megatons CO2 per year, significant amount, by maintaining the ability of these ecosystems that are under imminent threat to sequester carbon. So again, all of these places that she's identifying, they're important for protection because they are under imminent threat. Because if we don't protect them, they won't be there anymore. All right, so that's an important part of identifying the most effective nature-based climate solutions. Okay, so to support the policy, just this past December, I actually was amazing to attend the UN Biodiversity Summit in Montreal, out of which came the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So this is kind of the Paris Agreement moment for biodiversity, where 196 countries agreed to this framework. UNFCCC called it, said that the new international biodiversity agreement strengthens climate action, and out of that, Canada committed to protecting 30% of lands and fresh waters by 2030. So that's commonly known as 30 by 30. Sorry, I'm having Peter's problem of not being able to see my slide. But I think I know what's there. So currently about 13% of Canada is of Canada's lands and fresh waters are protected. So we're still a long way off from 30 by 30. Let's look at the Ontario context. So in Ontario, we are under 11% protected. So we're not even sort of at the average. I think we're 8th amongst provinces in the amount of protected areas, which, you know, as the biggest province, one of the biggest provinces, is not great. The last concerted effort in Ontario to grow protected areas was the Living Legacy efforts in the 1990s and 2000s, which did grow the province's protected areas from about 9% to basically where we are now, because not much has happened since. The target for Living Legacy was 12%, so we haven't even met that target yet. The Ford government's Made in Ontario Environment Plan, which is also their climate plan, does include a lot of big wording around growing protected places, but no targets or strategy to do so has ever been put forth. In 2021, Ontario appointed a protected areas working group made up of conservation experts that were hand-selected by the government to make recommendations to the Minister of Environment for how to grow protected places. Great. Unfortunately, that report that they put out just 6 months later has never been made public, has never been referred to by the Minister of Environment, although we know it was submitted to the Minister of Environment. Last year, I worked to make a Freedom of Information request to get that report, and I did obtain it. And here's some of the working group recommendations. So the report, called A New Approach Advancing Protected and Conserved Areas in Ontario, where you can read it, urges immediate action, calls for a comprehensive provincial protected areas strategy approved by cabinet based on objectives, targets, and timelines. So we do not have that right now. Emphasizes the importance of Indigenous-led conservation. That's a big part of it, actually. There are, across the province, several Indigenous communities that have proposed what's called Indigenous Protected and Conserved Areas in their traditional territories that the province has been ignoring, just not responding to. The working group recommendations upheld the goal of protecting 30% of lands and waters by 2030, which Ontario does not have that target, and also set out a timeline about how this could actually be achieved in Ontario. Advised a community-driven and collaborative approach. And the next one, it specifically applies to Catchacoma Forest. Work with conservation partners to explore areas where enhanced wildlife management areas or provincially significant wetlands on Crown land next to currently protected areas could be secured permanently. So Catchacoma is all of those things. It is an enhanced management wildlife area. It is a provincially significant wetland. It is adjacent to a provincial park, Kawartha Highlands, which adds to its value for conservation because it adds to connectivity, right? So wildlife connectivity, all of those things. The working group recommends the establishment of a Wild Ontario Accelerator Fund, so money to support it, and highlights strong. So there was actually public research done, polls done for the work by the working group. 86% of survey respondents support the creation of more parks and protected areas, even if it raised taxes, by the way. Okay, I know we're short on time, so I'm not going to go through all of this, but this is the Ontario government process for protecting Crown land that the Catchacoma Forest Stewardship Committee encountered when we were like, how can we propose the Catchacoma Forest to be protected? It's on Crown land. How does one go about doing that? This is the process. It's very complex, and it also, I mean, it's actually not that complex, but it requires the support of both the Ministry of the Environment and Conservation and Parks and the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. So that's what makes it difficult, because the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, which manages, what main mandate is to manage already protected parks, does not have the manpower, the person power, or the budget to do what they're supposed to do, which is identify candidate sites for protection. The Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, which is also supposed to recommend sites for designation as protection area, does not have the mandate. At one time, they did have the mandate to do that. They manage Crown land that is not protected, that is all Crown land that is not protected, all of it is leased for logging and mining. Okay, all of it that is not protected. And so they work for those industries. They didn't used to, now they do. Anyway, so I'm not going to go over this path, but it is important because the Catchacoma Forest Stewardship Committee, we did try to go down this path. So what has the Catchacoma Forest Stewardship Committee done in terms of advocacy with the help of AFIR and their science on the old growth? In 2019 and 2020, we attempted to meet, we did meet with the Bancroft and Forestry Company and Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry to share the old growth research that AFIR had done. And again, remember, no one else is doing this. No one else has information about where old growth is in Ontario. So we're sharing it with them, and we're saying, and we asked for a moratorium on the planned 2021 logging. Logging occurred, not as much as planned. But basically they said, we don't care. I mean, obviously it's more than that, but that was the general gist. In 2020, 2021, there was the opportunity for us to participate in public consultation for the 2021-2031, so the 10-year forest management plan. So every company that owns or that holds a license to log in Ontario, and there's about, oh, I can't remember the number, I think it's about 50 of them, must every 10 years give their plan, and then the MNRF has to approve their plan, and that's the only opportunity for public consultation. So we went as far as you could in that public consultation, which is called an issues resolution, and it involved a lot of work. And it resulted, we actually got a 1-year moratorium on logging that was planned. So we halted logging for 2021. We also got the MNRF to put conditions on any future logging in the Catchacoma stand. And that the main condition was to themselves, actually, which was interesting. The main condition was for the MNRF to develop an old growth identification protocol, because they didn't have one. And they still don't have one. They don't know how to identify old growth. So as it stands right now, logging is currently on hold. In 2021 to 2022, having that hold on logging, we now had the opportunity to pursue that big pathway that I showed you in the last slide to actually try to get permanent protection. So to make it either a conservation reserve or annexed to the adjacent provincial park, to pursue that path. Outreach to the MNRF around initiating a Crown Land Use Change application. So that's what it's called, a Crown Land Use Change application. The MNRF said they would only consider it if it was supported by the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. Okay, so then we started outreaching to the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, biologists, planners, who all told us, yes, it's an interesting forest. It has some good old growth qualities. We'd be interested in studying it, but we don't make the decisions. It all comes from the top. It all comes from the minister himself. Only the minister himself can tell us to even start looking at it. So we outreached to the local MPP, Dave Smith, and to the Minister of the Environment himself, David Piccini, just to support the beginning of a Crown Land Use application to evaluate the Catchacoma Forest as a candidate protected area. The superintendent of Kawartha Highlands Park was appointed as our liaison to MECP on this endeavor. The superintendent supported the annexation of the Catchacoma Forest to the park. During this time, letters were sent in support of protection by the municipality of Trent Lakes, the Catchacoma Cottagers Association, the mayor of Peterborough, and over 300 individuals. In 2023, the Minister Piccini sent a letter rejecting support for our ask to, again, not to protect it, but just to support a process to evaluate protection of it. With no explanation or rationale. We had sent pages and pages and pages and pages, reams of scientific information and support. The letter saying that denied any support was about 4 sentences long and gave no reason or rationale. And the minister so far has not responded to our requests for a meeting. So that's where we're at. It's a bit bleak, but there are some important takeaways and we're not giving up. So some of the important takeaways is the Catchacoma Old Growth Forest should be, according to all of the policy work that I just told you about, including Ontario's own expert working group, should be low-hanging fruit for the advancement of nature-based climate solutions and growing protected areas in the province. The Ontario Minister of Environment, this is another lesson that we've learned, it has 100% of the power in identifying, currently, in identifying lands and initiating processes to grow protected areas, but is entirely resistant to setting targets or strategy or being transparent about how he's going about that at all. The minister seems to prioritize private land trusts and putting the Ontario government's rubber stamp on basically already protected areas. You may have heard of some of them, such as the Alfred Bog, the Uxbridge Urban Park, or the Big Wind new provincial park that is not new at all. It was already protected. It's just going to become operational rather than protecting public land that would remove logging or mining tenures. Old growth is not a priority for protection, and that's very problematic both federally and provincially, partly due to lack of identification. And it remains to be seen what will move this provincial government. The federal government has said, Stephen Guilbeault, the Minister of the Environment for the country, has said that he will intervene if provinces don't, do what they need to meet the 30 by 30, or grassroots public demand. And personally, to me, I think that's where my heart lies, and I think that's where we can really move on by having a concerted voice. And it starts with understanding that this is not a voice in the dark. This is a voice that is supported by international, national policy and science. Sorry if I took too long. But this is the last slide, and we do the QR code there, but I can also put it in the chat, is a link to our action page where you can easily email both MPP Dave Smith and Minister Piccini and urge him to support protection for Catchacoma Forest.
So Katie, wow, I keep having this image of the last page of the Lorax. I speak for the trees. You know, you and Peter and the Forest Stewardship Committee, and I just keep thinking as I'm listening to you that, you know, this forest wouldn't be protected without your committee. And your point that really resonates for me is that nature-based climate solutions protection is the best of them. So like, why would we plant new trees when we've already got them planted and we have intact and whole ecosystems that are so valuable? And the other point, which won't surprise anyone in this group probably, is that the ministry, the Ford government, doesn't have the capacity, the skills, the knowledge, the strategies, or the targets that are required, and that no one would know about the working group recommendations if you hadn't applied for the Freedom of Information to get that. And so really, once again, you know, government is ignoring research, they're talking, they don't have the capacity to do it. And so back to, maybe we can hope that the feds will help, but it's grassroots, that's key. So when we post the video, we will have the slides posted as well, but I think we could probably take out that QR code and highlight that on the website, exactly, so that people can just like, boom, that's what we need to do in order to get more people involved, more people writing letters. So thank you both, Peter, and thank you, Katie, for your passion and for simplifying what I know is very complicated, reams and reams of research and stuff you've had to work through to, you know, make this really understandable for us. Thank you so much. And don't worry about how much time you took.
Yeah. Definitely worth the investment.
So yeah, I've had a few questions. How about we open up for questions to other folks who are here this evening? If you want to either just raise your hand or unmute yourself.
Yeah, so there's both I mean, you can physically raise your hand, or you can use the little icon from the menu below called raise hand if you've got questions to ask.
Well, I have a question.
Beth got one to go, ready to go.
Yeah, I do. So you talked, Katie, about the working group recommendations that you were able to make public. Like, it is I'm speechless. What, like, now we all know what they say, but is there any movement on any of those at all?
No movement on the part of the government, but I am working with folks from Ontario Nature. We've written a letter to the Minister of the Environment, to David Piccini, you know, and obviously we're going to CC a whole bunch of other people, urging him to implement the high-level recommendations. And we are actively still getting sign-ons. So far we have 130 sign-ons from organizations. So we are looking for organizations to sign on to the letter. And then we are really hoping to get some media attention to it, and also enlist some of the opposition parties to directly ask the minister about it in when Parliament resumes. So of course we know that the Greenbelt scandal stuff is going to be pretty big once Parliament resumes. And so I think the plan is to sort of like wait a couple weeks, and then hopefully get, because I mean, they are separate things, but they are related, right? So they are separate in the sense that Greenbelt isn't like, so when I talk about protected places, it's governed by different legislation than like the Greenbelt Act, right? So, and different ministries as well. And I mean, in my opinion, the Ministry of Environment has gotten off scot-free on all of the Greenbelt takeouts because it's not their purview. But I mean, I think the fact that I think the two are similar scandals, if I can use that word, in the sense that it's ignoring expert recommendations and advice that the government itself enlisted, right? So in the Greenbelt case, you know, we know that the affordable housing, I can't remember the exact name of the group, but did say there's no need to go into the Greenbelt for housing. And on this side, we're talking about a group that was enlisted of experts that says we need to meet these targets and have a strategy to grow protected places. And it's just been gathering dust, you know, for 2 years. So sorry, that was again going on too long. But yeah, so there is going to be, I hope, some movement on that. And we're going to be pressuring the government on that probably in October. And yes, if I will also send the link to 4RG to sign on to the letter.
Yeah, that would be great.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah,
Are we signed on?
I'm sure that will be possible. Yeah.
Kind of related, Laurie Scott would be the MPP in that region, yes?
Oh,
Yeah.
No, Dave Smith is the MPP currently in that region.
Oh,
Although it used to be Laurie Scott.
I see.
And we have word it will be Laurie Scott again, but currently it's Dave Smith.
Okay, and if you haven't got any leverage through him at all, he hasn't been helpful.
He came out to the forest for a photo shoot.
Okay.
But
Fair.
yeah, since then won't answer any of our emails, won't have a meeting.
Right.
so I see a question in the chat from Linda Sunderland asking, you know, what exactly can we do as individuals?
I mean, I know everyone gets told to write a letter and you're like, my letters don't matter. They do, like, from the other side, they do matter. Like what I do doesn't matter if I don't, you know, I spend all day advocating, but if no one else, that's my job. And if regular people aren't advocating, anything I do means nothing, literally. So it really does, every letter written matters. And the action page we have is like, you write your own letter, we give you ideas of what to say, but it's going to come from you. You know, if you want to go the extra step, ask for a meeting with your, I mean, if you're in Dave Smith's riding, amazing, ask for a meeting about Catchacoma Forest, because we can't get one, but maybe you can, you know. If you're in David Piccini's riding, ask for a meeting. And you don't have to be an expert, you know, you just have to care. I would say on top of that, I mean, we are holding another public hike in Catchacoma September 30th, getting out to the forest and honestly, like, seeing it and experiencing what it is and why it matters is huge.
What time
And
is
then, you know, definitely donating to Peter Quimby's and AFER's research. He's had amazing research students out there, and like, I really just hope we can keep up with that.
Right.
On that note, Peter, you mentioned in terms of some of the things that you're aiming to do out there, you mentioned citizen science, and what particular projects of citizen science are you trying to get going?
Well, we have quite a few projects going. I mean, we you know, in terms of species at risk, like we're monitoring turtles and during breeding season. We're monitoring migratory birds during breeding season. We're always trying to gather more information about dead wood as well as live wood and what it is like. What is it? Like the whole question of what an old growth forest is still, even from a scientific point of view, poorly understood. So there's we want to do a sort of a comprehensive, have a comprehensive understanding of the forest landscape, but it sort of requires that we focus in on variables that are reasonable to assess and that have bang for the buck. So if we, for example, if we can document that there are Blanding's turtles, and we know that there are Blanding's turtles in the Catchacoma Forest, that's only going to help to protect it, right? So if you, it's basically little incremental steps. So every species at risk that we see and that we observe and make a record of is moving in the right direction. Like seeing one turtle isn't gonna solve the problem of protection, but seeing a turtle this year, seeing a couple turtles next year, and then having that trend is something that will help. Like the Algonquin wolf. I mean, the five-line skink, the Canada warbler, all these different, whippoorwill. I'm sure whippoorwills are there. We haven't found them yet, but they've got to be there because I know they've been sighted like 10 kilometers south of there. I think we've documented, I think, 3 bat species. We think that there are some bat species at risk there. We've hardly touched aquatic ecosystems. We only have identified a few fish, but there's all kinds of invertebrates and other creatures besides fish that use aquatic ecosystems. So there's all kinds of work that can be done. I guess if someone was interested in helping to collect data, the best thing to do would be to contact me. And then, as programs develop and people become available to lead those programs, I can put, the interested volunteers in touch with the individuals who are leading those surveys. And every year we seem to be developing more programs. And if we do get an Earthwatch grant, which I think I feel pretty good about getting, it's an organization called Earthwatch Institute out of Boston, then that's going to ramp up our work quite a bit. And we'll actually be looking for official citizen scientists that will register through Earthwatch. And then funding that comes from Earthwatch can be matched by some other organizations, and maybe we'll even get ourselves a full-time, field technician that we could have collecting data all year round. I mean, nature doesn't stop when it gets cold and rainy and snowy, right? So I can't really say that we have this program or that program, but what I can say is that we have quite a few of them, but to some extent, it kind of depends on the funding we get and how much funding we get and which gaps we feel like we need to fill because we haven't yet, addressed those. And so, for example, this summer or this spring, we did a sampling of the central portion of the forest just for wildflowers because you only find them during May and June. So you have to do it. If you start your survey work in July, you're going to miss many of those ephemeral species. So same with things like, like the breeding ponds and pools for salamanders that really only there in the spring, right? For the most part. So there's certain things that are time dependent. But again, until we get, more funding and we get more consistent funding, it'll be hard to say we have this program or that program because I don't really want to commit to something unless I know I have, the funding to back it up. But we've started a lot of different projects, and usually we can kind of satisfy someone's interest who wants to go out and volunteer and help out. So if you're a person like that, get in touch with AFER and or Katie if you're interested more in the education side or the advocacy side.
Called the National Lake Blitz. They're encouraging citizen science. They ask people to adopt a lake. They provide all the sampling techniques and materials, and they ask people to choose a lake and to monitor it over several years.
Yeah, and I guess even people just going up and using their eBird or using iNaturalist and just document.
Exactly, that's true. Yeah.
Is
yeah, for sure.
Good. Yeah, Marilyn Freeman made a point here in the comments. First, excellent presentation, and then she said one thing she learned directly from engineers during a workshop is that they have an acronym called DAD, which is decide, announce, and then defend. And so, in other words, decide what you want to do and don't listen to the public. But I think with enough pressure, like Katie was saying, that I think you can make them listen if you raise enough stink about things. So hopefully we can do that.
Try.
We do have a question by Patricia Morton.
You're good.
Yeah, hi. Peter and Katie, I'd just like to thank you so much for all your great work. I still ask, what can we as individuals, as the public, do to help? I mean, I have sent the petitions, I've sent the letters to, you know, our MPP, to the Ford government, and all I get is computer replies, you know. So I'm wondering, first of all, is this forest in Trent Lakes Township? And because if it is, I know that Trent Lakes is extremely environmentally conscious and it's doing a lot of good things. So that's my first question. And if it is, I'm just suggesting we could all write directly to Trent Lake councilors and you know, send a delegation to them, and really get involved with them. But maybe it's not in Trent Lakes. I don't know.
It is, yep, it is in the municipality of Trent Lakes, and you're right, the Trent Lakes Council has actually been very supportive of protection and written several letters to the minister in support of our requests.
Great.
And even the latest letter they sent was in support of our request for just a meeting.